Hi, folks. It's Allison. I'm just doing a short stream. Um, this is a shout out to my friend and colleague Lynn Davenport, who has been spending an inordinate amount of time in Austin lately, lobbying against bad education bills. And so Lynn and I spent the afternoon yesterday putting together a really nice presentation. And so, shocker, it's going to be multiple parts, but I'm still editing the piece that we did, but looking at open education resources, and that these open education resources are going to be really a central feature, linking Web3 and digital identity and speculative human capital finance in the name of equity and in the name of accountability and in the name of like optimizing labor developments to code this extended reality into being. And so none of the people who are in charge of things seem to understand what is actually going on. And so Lynn has been doing really incredible work, showing up, speaking truth to power. I've been doing a little bit from the internet side of things. And so I just thought this is a short story that it's been a while since I've done a read aloud, and I really do need to get back to World Sensorium. But I have a little bit of time this afternoon, so I thought I'd just go ahead and read this out because I've been meaning to for a while. It's a short story. It's called Overvalued, and it's from Slate Magazine in 2018. So, okay, there's one viewer out there. Thank you for joining in. This isn't like a pre-announced thing. So before I start, I just have a few things just to sort of, put out there. I've gotten some prickly feedback lately from some individuals, and I want to clarify. I think there's still some confusion around this idea that my belief that sort of that love is like a key, one of our strengths and our ability to stand in the face of what is unfolding, which is highly mechanical and unnatural. And I think that maybe some people take that to mean that we're supposed to show up and just love everybody on the internet like they were our friends and family. And, if you know me, you know that I don't actually, I do take points with certain, I have publicly taken positions against positions that people have taken and framings that people use. But I'm not a mean person. And generally, if you're bringing energy into my space and I spend a lot of time really thoughtfully considering my points of view, and it's fine, if you're someone that lives in a different story that is runs counter to mine. But actually, my space is pretty carefully curated. And so if you're not actually expanding on the conversation and you just want to present a counter narrative that doesn't really have anything to do with the overall thing, that's fine, but I would say you should just start your own YouTube channel or develop your own blog and do it there. If it's not sort of a carefully considered framing, or if the framing is like you don't tell the story that I'm living in. The story that I live in is that I've identified these people as the problem, this group of people, this individual person, and the story that you told that I just listened to isn't that story, and I'm going to be upset about it. I would just say that my channel isn't probably the right place for you, and that if it makes you uncomfortable, you should just move on. So, I'm not here, I don't have spite for people on the internet, but I'm not here to actually love up everybody on the internet either. And I think that that's somewhat of an unreasonable ask. And, if you find that the way I manage my page, which is honestly mostly outward facing, my goal isn't to run a highly interactive page, although, I'd love for more people to pick up this information and put their own, lens on it where they are and develop their own web pages about it and their own blogs and their own podcasts. That would be great. It's not, there's a lot of other blogs that are way more interactive, and that's not really my goal. And so if you want to just show up and yuck on the stuff that I just said without really any just mostly that you're living a different story and it offends you that I haven't chosen to say the things you want me to say. I would just say, like, you're just not going to be in my space. And that doesn't mean I don't love you or that I don't think that love isn't powerful, but I think it's probably unreasonable to sort of imagine that anybody out there on the internet is going to just show up and love everybody. So anyway, just to get that off my chest, if you would like to call me a brittle dictator of my blog or my YouTube channel, you can certainly do that. It will probably make you feel bad, and you're probably not going to get a lot out of what I'm offering anyway. So, okay. So I want to go ahead. I'm going to move on to this view. Hopefully you guys can see this. It's the Slate Magazine, and the short story is called Overvalued. And here it says a new short story about a future in which people can buy and sell shares in one another by Mark Stasenko. And it's not new anymore. It was written in November 27th, 2018 in Slate Magazine. So I'm just going to go ahead and start reading this because this is the stuff that Lynn and myself and others have been trying to articulate, and Jason and Leo and Brandy and Cliff and those of us. I think it has a lot to do with the Flow Life series. This idea that people are going to have some sort of equity in the value they create as data in their living environments is very much about that, and that will be linked to speculative finance and betting on people's futures, which I've been talking about and writing about since at least probably about this time, 2017, 2018. This is from a series in Slate called Future Tense. And it's interesting to me because it is a partnership. This Future Tense is a partnership of Slate, New America. Now, New America is Tamika Tilleman, or was. He's now moved on to, an A16Z Andreessen Horowitz blockchain spinoff. But he was the guy who essentially set up digital identity and social impact finance at New America. And that's how I first found out about blockchain, was watching the New America World Bank Summit from 2016 online. So it's Slate, New America, and Arizona State. And of course, Arizona State is Michael Crow. And Michael Crow is the president there, and the founding board chair and highly involved in In-Q-Tel, the CIA's venture capital arm. So when I went to Tempe and looked all over Arizona State University's campus, there was a lot there about biotech and social evolution and virtual reality and digital education. And, Arizona is a big education choice state. So I think this is all important to sort of keep in mind in the light of this story. Okay. So evidently every month in 2018, they wrote a fictional short story and shared it in Slate Magazine, this partnership. So, Overvalued. How was your day? Jack asked his wife as she took off her black leather pumps at the door of their spacious industrial chic condo in Nomad. Good, Sophia lied. They didn't used to lie to each other. Not even about the small things. Unfiltered honesty had always come naturally to them, despite their glaring differences. Maybe because of them. But for the past 6 weeks, nothing seemed natural anymore. It was strange how much the death of a stranger had changed things. She should have felt happy, or so she kept telling herself. She had recently been promoted to partner at her fund and shifted her role from short selling to long-term investments. Despite having to pay out about 10% of all pre-tax earnings as dividends to her personal investors and an outrageous 54% to Uncle Sam, she earned enough to afford the 3-bedroom, 4-bathroom condo they didn't fill, the designer furniture Jack shopped for with all his free time, and the bullshit modern art that now just looked blood-stained, like blood-stained limp airbags after a car accident. But she didn't feel happy because one tiny, uncontrollable bit of bad luck sucked all of the serotonin and dopamine from her brain and replaced it with cortisol and adrenaline. Jack was the only one who saw that bit of bad luck coming, the only one who tried to stop it. Even though she knew it wasn't fair, she blamed him for not doing more. She stared at him as he got drunk on a bottle of overproof bourbon he wouldn't be able to afford without her. Instead of drinking all day, why don't you do something? She regretted asking almost immediately. I wish it could, but people like me don't get hired to do anything besides work on factory lines or clean up shit after RIA assholes. Well, that's redundant, she mumbled. For emphasis, he shot back. RIA stood for Rich Indoctrinated Assholes. So she was right, but he was quick too. Jack's IQ was high, not quite as high as hers, but he was in the 1.9 sigma above the mean, so certainly high enough that he would have qualified for a respected university. It didn't matter. His family couldn't have afforded it, and the prodigy market hadn't been around yet to help with the cost of a degree. Sophia's education, a degree in civil engineering from a good school, but not one of the hallowed seven-figure schools, had cost close to $800,000. Her initial prodigy offering hadn't raised enough for a seven-figure degree. The 13 schools whose reputation emboldened them to charge more than $1 million for a degree. But she was still fortunate to have parents wealthy enough to hire counsel and brokers to manage a first-generation IPO in the newly minted prodigy market. Jack was older, and his parents were worse off, so he graduated high school with no chance. Jack would have liked to have been a pediatrician, but if you couldn't afford college, there was no way of avoiding ending up on the low-wage, unskilled wallhead side of modern American workforce divide, looking on enviously at the high-skilled RIAs. So Jack, like his parents, was a wallhead. He worked in a factory making hospital gurneys and wheelchairs, as close as he could get to joining the medical profession. As it was, he knew he'd soon be replaced by automation, as so many of his friends had been. But unlike his parents, Jack had married an RIA, and up until 6 weeks ago, their marriage of opposites had worked well. Sophia forced herself to think about how he was with his elderly parents who'd waited for a basic income to cover their life's needs they couldn't afford. They died waiting, and when they did, Jack didn't pretend to be strong or controlled or masculine. He was angry, uncontrollable, honest. And that's when she knew she loved him, and she found herself hoping that she still loved him, but so much had changed in 6 weeks. 6 weeks ago, Catherine Talley Anders died. And ever since then, white lies and cortisol and whiskey and blame had taken over. 6 weeks ago, Sophia had never seen the name Catherine Talley Anders, and now it possessed her every thought. Her brain played that name and that face on repeat. More problematically, her brain blamed her over and over and over again for killing her. It was so mind-numbingly dull filling out a W-9 tax form on his wall-mounted Ecosphere screen. How could there still even be a W-9 form? Its persistence in the world seemed to mock the rest of the technological progress enveloping most aspects of life. Then he caught himself. Was this the dullest thought he'd ever had? When he started doing contract work, he was told, no 2 days are the same. Those people had lied to him. Or more likely lied to themselves. Alex prepped for every job in the exact same way, and this job would be no different from the dozens before and the dozens after. The Iridius security system was on his coffin-sized safe, scanned his irises in the basement of the 5-bedroom suburban home where he lived alone. The door propped open after he was verified, and he retrieved 2 SCC CPX-2 pistols and their corresponding AACTI Rant 9 silencers. He added a serrated 9-inch SOG hunting blade to his artillery as well, but doubted he'd have to use it unless things went terribly wrong. A part of him hoped they would. Alex always called what he did, quote, liquidating an over-resourced target. But in regular English, once shed of all the Aurelian indirections and rationalizations we bake into our use of language, he was nothing other than a hitman. The bud permanently in his ear gently vibrated, and the voice on the other side told him they received the W-9. The job would be listed as, quote, supply chain consulting on their balance sheet. He'd received confirmation of the go within 24 hours. Sophia's monitors lit up in her east-facing office at the Athena Prodigy Management on the 47th floor of a 49-floor building, just as the sun rose. She opened her portfolio and searched for ticker symbol KTA110811, like she had every morning for the past 6 weeks. She knew that seeing it would gut her, but she did it anyway, futilely hoping it wouldn't show up at all, as if it had never happened. But every morning, there it was, with a total gain of $32 million floating next to the symbol. And that's all it was, a symbol. It didn't say Catherine Talley Anders. It didn't show her picture. It didn't mention her death. It was just a symbol on a spreadsheet. And every morning, she'd close out and try to focus on long-term Prodigy investments. And every morning, she hated her long-term Prodigy investments and herself a little more. Prodigy wasn't an accurate term anymore. At first, the prodigy market created by a coalition of what ultimately came to be known as the seven-figure universities was only open for investments in the highest potential students like Sophia, actual prodigies. But it was so profitable that before long, any underperforming student or any bullshit for-profit school could access the market. High potential students could float shares of 10% of their future lifetime earnings on the market. But students with less sterling credentials would offer 20%, 40%, even 60% of all future income to garner interest. The market drove up the demand for RIAs, both on the part of families eager to produce them and of investors eager to acquire stakes in them. And the heightened demand further exacerbated the cost of attending the seven-figure schools. Universities touted the market as a great equalizer while their multi-billion-dollar endowments bloated. It was a highly liquid market at the top end, which allowed for an entirely new class of equities and derivatives. Moreover, prodigies were bundled into PAGs, prodigy asset groups, by banks for a particular risk level and industry cluster, triple B plus aspiring software engineers, for instance. The average investor didn't even have to research individual assets. They could just bet on market demand for a certain profession or skill set. It was a casino. But instead of betting on black or red, the vote was on whether a high school kid was going to be successful. And Sophia was good at making that bet. Now, I'm just going to pause for a second and say that this is talking about income sharing agreements on blockchain. This is what Edley has been setting up, among others, the career impact bonds, social finance. And exactly as she's laying out here, maybe it will start with an initial use case, but it will broaden and the reach and this idea of staking future income. That's something actually Lynn and I talked about, Brandy and I talked about this HUMA, a blockchain credit card where you get credit, like a line of credit against future earnings. It's all of this stuff that's bubbling up now, which is why I continue to say that we need to understand Web3 and we need to understand the predictive modeling and the new innovations in predatory credit. Like, it's not just consumer loans anymore. It's not just having higher insurance rates. These are entirely new markets, although they're not actually new, because clearly these short stories have been floating the idea. They were floating this idea 4.5 years ago. And the author, I'm sure, didn't just find out about it, right? Like, so this has been bubbling in the background for some time. And Purdue was Purdue Global, the leader in those markets. So back to the story. Some high potential prodigies could apply for their own ticker symbol. These were much more volatile, potentially more lucrative for traders like Sophia. She liked to short individual assets, betting their value would go down. And KTA 110811 had been her biggest short position ever. Before its death, KTA 110811 was an exciting asset, not just for Sophia, but for the entire market. KTA 110811 was extremely high potential, touted on CNBC as one of the few assets that may be ROI positive before its higher education even began. Needless to say, KTA 110811's market cap was spiraling upward. The futures market was betting that its lifetime net worth would be in the hundreds of millions, if not more. KTA 110811 entered the prodigy market even before entering high school, offering up to 10% of all future lifetime earnings. It was an above-average asset. Good grades, accelerated, particularly in math and science, stable family. But it wasn't until ninth grade that the asset really hit the radar. In ninth grade, KTA 110811 proved that cancer cells bonded to healthy cells behaved differently, and therefore that the billions pharmaceutical companies had spent on laboratory tests of unbonded cancer cells had been a waste. This asset had made a discovery capable of impacting millions of lives and billions of dollars at 15 years old. KTA 110811 exploded in the prodigy market. It was expected to be a part of the team that discovered non-invasive long-term cures for late-stage malignant tumors, particularly as related to bone marrow. But when there's excitement around an asset, investors ignore risk and potential vulnerabilities. They overvalue the asset. No one asks what could go wrong in a climate of irrational exuberance. No one, that is, except for dispassionate short sellers like Sophia. She had built her entire career around the contrarian quest for these overvalued assets. Since the Ernst Mayer's law following the 2021 depression, liquidators like Alex were quietly contracted by unscrupulous companies to, quote, liquidate underperforming, overcompensated employees who could no longer be terminated by legal means. This increasingly common, if unacknowledged practice was known as, quote, self-regulation. This new contract was different, though. The firm that had hired Alex wasn't self-regulating. Instead, they held a massive short position in an asset in the prodigy market and stood to make a heavy profit if the asset were to be liquidated. Alex received no identifying or demographic details about the target until right before the hit. The details of the person didn't matter. They were a target, no more, no less than a piece of paper with a bullseye drawn on it. But traditionally, he was liquidating long-term overpaid executives, almost exclusively older men, sometimes older women, whose survivors stood to cash in large life insurance policies. But a job involving the prodigy market meant that the target could be young and would likely not be from a wealthy family. When he accepted the contract, he refused the details like always, but he did find himself wondering how it would make him feel if it was a kid. And for a moment, he realized he wasn't bored with the job. It was only 8 weeks ago that Sophia first discovered KTA 110811's flaw. She found it in a simple iShare photo in which KTA 110811 was jumping into the air with friends, arms above its head. It was in long sleeves at the beach. It was always wore long sleeves, but because its arms were above its head, the sleeves had fallen down just enough for Sophia to spot the tip of a small scar on its wrist. And after Sophia verified that the mark on the asset's wrist was indeed a self-inflicted scar, she went through her network of hackers to gain access to the asset's medical records. The story for KTA 110811 couldn't have been better. It was seeing a psychiatrist until it entered the prodigy market when it dropped the shrink in the antidepressant prescriptions because, of course, those disclosures would have lowered its share price. Materially adverse information, as the filings called it. It was only a week before Sophia discovered this that she had been promoted to partner at Athena. The promotion came with a huge raise and the ability to trade the firm's own equity and share in its profits, dramatically increasing her potential bonuses. It's usually hard to ascertain how much a given promotion or event will impact your overall life, but not for Sophia because she herself was an asset traded on the prodigy market. She knew exactly how much the promotion increased her worth, 29.2%. Such an increase was extremely rare for someone already in the workforce. The promotion drove her share price up to $551. Rumors spread that even her own fund was asking to take a position in her. And with the confidence of her market value spike, she used her entire new trading portfolio to short KTA 110811. Everything. It was an insane move, the biggest short position the fund had ever taken. But Sophia was logical, and this was a rational trade, as rational a trade as she had ever taken. Once she bet, Every leveraged dollar against KTA 110811, she sent the photos and the medical records to CNBC under the same reliable alias she always did. And she waited for the network to cross-reference and validate the information. Less than a week later, the story broke right before 8 a.m. KTA 110811 suffered from depression and had acted on the disease in the past with self-mutilation. The story even went up to Sophia and asked if there had been suicide attempts. It was perfect. Within the hour, KTA 110811's share price crashed by almost 30%, from $347 to $243, and Sophia earned her firm nearly $11 million. The other partners wanted Sophia to cash in. A doctor's statement or a well-timed announcement of some research breakthrough could bounce KTA 110811 stock back quickly. Sophia talked them out of it. There was more room to fall. She knew the stress of losing its future would be poorly managed by a highly motivated, anxiety-laden 16-year-old asset suffering from depression. But the market closed that night with KTA 110811's share price up from its low, not by much, but the take for the firm would have been about $8 million, and the conversations would be about the $3 million lost and not the $8 million earned. But less than 2 hours later, Sophia's phone rang. The voice on the other end excitedly told her to turn on CNBC. KTA 110811 was dead. A suspected suicide. There was a note. They weren't reading it. The share price dropped to 11 cents within a minute in after-hours trading, and Sophia did what she was programmed to do. She unloaded the short position and earned the firm $32 million. It was her biggest day ever. The partners congratulated Sophia for her and their triumph. They insisted that she had nothing to do with the asset's death, that she could barely follow their words. Her mind was racing, debating whether she was a murderer or not. And for the first time since she was a girl, Sophia found that the cortisol controlling her circular thoughts was far stronger than her logic. She expected to fight with Jack that night. He had always been piously against profiting off the failures of others, as he put it. He had been trying to get her to stop for years. She opened the door, and Jack reeked of bourbon. He'd seen the news already. Jack always got home hours before Sophia even left her office. That day had been no different. He had stepped on the treadmill in their extra bedroom and was less than a mile into his run when he saw the news. A prodigy asset familiar from dinner conversations had committed suicide. Jack shut down the treadmill and grabbed his computer. He became obsessed, reading every article he could find. The financial outlets referred to her as KTA 110811, but some smaller publications called her Catherine Tally Anders. Kate, her family called her. He read about Kate's life, her dog, her 2 older brothers who joined the Air Force, her parents who'd immigrated to America 34 years earlier, and then at 5:24 p.m. he read about Kate's cancer research. And that's when he started drinking. Kate was focused on multiple myeloma, the cancer that had killed Jack's mother. They said Kate might help find an affordable cure, and Kate was going to do that. Kate, who killed herself, so that he could have this lavish 3-bed, 4-bath condo in Nomad with paintings on the wall that he didn't even like. He filled another glass and another, and that is why he smelled like booze when Sophia arrived home. And when Sophia walked in the door, his disgust was displaced by surprise. He could see that she hated herself too, and it was the first time he ever saw that look on Sophia's face. And so instead of fighting, he walked up to her and wrapped his arms around his wife. They talked as she drank wine and mindlessly repeated that she was certain it would have happened anyway. He agreed with her, and maybe that's when the white lies between them began. Sophia went to work for the next few days, but she couldn't focus. She'd tell herself that her more successful peers wouldn't care. They'd be celebrating. She hated that she didn't feel that way. She'd motivate herself for an hour or two, but the emotional crash always followed, and she'd go back to reading about KTA 110811. Sophia gathered the partners and asked to be moved to long-term investments. She thought if she started investing in asset futures, she would be able to forgive herself. Her partners took less than an hour to discuss the transition and approve it. She found out after the fact that there had been a lot of pushback, but her friend and partner, Ether, had put his foot down. Humans before profits, he had apparently said. He had refused to leave the room if they didn't accede to Sophia's request, and they did, and Sophia's share price on the Prodigy market dropped within hours to below 400, the first time in 3 years. For a day, she felt relieved. She was done shorting. She convinced herself this is all she needed to move forward, but she only felt worse. Sophia wasn't the best at what she did anymore. She was part of the conventional herd, rather than a hunter seeking to capitalize on flaws in the conventional wisdom. And when she was still shorting, she would be able to motivate herself for at least an hour or two. She'd spend full days obsessing over Catherine, searching and researching her name on the internet, rereading articles she'd nearly memorized. Sophia finally understood how Catherine Talley Anders could find relief from cutting herself. In fact, Sophia had started wearing a hair tie on her wrist that she would snap on her skin when she would think about Catherine. It didn't matter that she'd started shorting prodigies, that she'd already killed one. At this point, all she could do was drown out the guilt with just enough alcohol to quiet her conscience. And so after 6 weeks of torture, Sophia decided she would numb her mind with work. And that morning, instead of looking up KTA 110811, Sophia opened up her ecosphere screen and started investigating the highest valued prodigies, poking them for vulnerabilities. And after a few hours, she didn't think about Catherine. The call came through a few minutes after 6 a.m. The job was confirmed for that night. From a dwindling roll of plastic, Alex cut out the 3x3 sheet on his garage floor, the one he'd strip onto after the job. He mindlessly prepped the 2 tubs of silicon dioxide to dissolve the gloves, foot covers, and surgical mask he'd be wearing. He put in mirrored contact lenses to block any iris scanning that could track him back to the scene later. And then the encrypted message came through, including a new file with the target's information: picture, age, gender, identifying marks. Normally, Alex would review the file, but for this job, he opted to wait until he was on location. There would be less time to change his mind, something he knew would cost him all future contracts. And even though he was so painfully bored by his career, something about this contract was making him hate it a little less. Early the next morning, Sophia walked over to Ether's office. He was there, of course. He always was, and he greeted her by offering up half his breakfast, a caramel brownie. "This is the best fucking thing I ever tasted," Ether said, placing it in her hand. "Bite it, I'm telling you. You cannot not feel good while eating that." Sophia acquiesced, and then she laughed because he was right, and for a moment she felt good. "I have a trade I want to run by you," Sophia laid a one sheet on his desk. He glanced. "A short position? I threw a fit for you." "I just stumbled across it when I was looking for long-term investment," she lied. And he knew she was lying. "Look, if you want to be trading short positions, I completely support. I don't want a big position. I'm not going to game the press or get too involved. But what do you think about me taking a minor position?" she asked. Ether agreed. She was lucky. Ether was a good friend. He understood, and it actually made her feel a bit better, sort of like she was taking another small bite of that brownie. Sitting in his car outside of a luxury condominium complex, Alex finally opened the target's file. He scrolled quickly through. The asset was young compared with most contracts, but most definitely an adult. He breathed a sigh of relief. And then he sighed again, but this time with a touch of disappointment. Alex screwed the silencer onto the 2 pistols. He stepped out of his car and walked toward the home of his target, who lived in a supposedly secure 32-story building in Manhattan. Fortunately, wall-head security guards were merely decoratives for professionals like Alex. Alex entered through a maintenance door alongside the alley, and as the guard approached to investigate, the tiny needle slipped into the skin on his neck. He was about to scream when Alex rested the gun on his forehead. "Don't make noise and you'll be awake in a few hours, I promise," Alex calmly said as he pressed the plunger. The sedative flowed into the guard's body, and Alex laid him down. Alex rode the elevator and noticed his heart was as calm as if he was watching TV reruns. He thought of his first contract. He remembered shaking. Sophia returned home late with the smell of dinner fresh in the air. She took off her chestnut suede flats and gave Jack a kiss. He reeked of whiskey like usual. She didn't care. They sat down to eat. Everything seemed mostly normal. "I took a minor short position today, nothing big, and..." "Soph, Jesus, 6 weeks ago someone killed herself. She was manic depressive. And you went and told the whole world that she was overvalued for that." The conversation stopped and Jack looked away. "I need this," Sophia said, stifling what could have been some tears, and then got up from the table and walked towards their expansive wine rack. Alex waited in the darkened hall in front of his target's condo where the lights were off, and he watched his target get up from the dinner table and approach an expansive wine rack, only about 13 paces away. He could hear her steps, he could hear her breathe, and as the target grabbed a bottle of wine, a 2024 Chateau Le Pen Bordeaux, Alex watched her snap a hair tie on her wrist. The target uncorked the bottle as Alex raised the pistol in his right hand. The target's husband was close by. It wasn't going to be clean. The husband would have to watch what Alex knew was going to be a mess. As Alex exhaled calmly and tightened his grip, he realized that he felt nothing. He was just as bored as when he was filling out the W-9. But then that small bud permanently in Alex's ears vibrated silently. If it hasn't happened yet, we're calling it off. A voice came through the tiny bud in Alex's ear. The voice belonged to a man named Ether, Alex's paymaster for the day. And without a word, Alex lowered the gun and stayed quietly in the shadows, watching the target swirl her red wine, so perfectly unaware of how close she had come to never tasting it, so perfectly unaware that her own fund recognized her as an overvalued asset and took a massive short position on her, so perfectly unaware that Ether planned on keeping the fund's short position on her, reviewing it again next quarter to see if she was back to shorting successfully, so perfectly unaware that she didn't really want to die. For today, apparently she was just profitable enough. Sophia walked back to her dinner table and took another sip of wine, and Alex slipped out of her condo and arrived home 32 minutes later. He dissolved his clothes in the pre-made acid bath, sterilized his weapon, disposed of the mirrored contact lenses, and took a scalding hot shower. It was the first job ever called off after he'd already seen the target. What if he had pulled the trigger before it was called off? The thought made his heart beat a little faster as the water poured over him. What if he had pulled the trigger? But he hadn't. So for one more quarter, Sophia was allowed to stay perfectly unaware, perfectly alive, perfectly valued. For now, at least. So that is the end of this, and I have some things I have to move on and do, so this will be it for just now. But thanks for joining in for Overvalued from 2018. This is the stuff we're talking about, Web3 and human capital finance and the Internet of Everything and prediction markets. Take care, guys.